Assalamu alaikum, and a sincere welcome to Hidayah. In a time of great confusion, we are committed to the vital task of separating divine truth from human distortion and luminous faith from the darkness of extremist ideology. If you value this crucial work of intellectual and spiritual clarity, please strengthen our voice by subscribing and following the channel. Together, we can reclaim the narrative of Islam with knowledge and courage. Today, we must undertake a difficult but essential analysis. We move from understanding the classical ethics of warfare to diagnosing a modern disease, the systematic weaponization of the concept of jihad by terrorist organizations. This is not merely a discussion of politics. It is a deep theological and methodological critique. Groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and their affiliates do not represent a strict or radical interpretation of Islam. They represent a fundamental break from Islamic orthodoxy, a break achieved through a calculated process of textual cherry-picking, historical decontextualization, and the outright rejection of the very mechanisms that have preserved Islamic law for centuries. To understand their distortion is to inoculate ourselves and our communities against it. The first and most critical rupture they enact is the rejection of scholarly consensus, or ijma. For over 1,400 years, Islam has preserved its intellectual integrity through a living tradition of scholarship, ulama. These scholars, trained for decades in language, jurisprudence, fiqh, hermeneutics, and the principles of legal derivation, usul al-fiqh, are the guardians of the tradition. Their consensus on foundational issues, like the conditions for jihad, the protection of non-combatants, and the necessity of legitimate authority, constitutes a binding orthodoxy. Terror groups, led by ideologues with no legitimate scholarly lineage or rigorous training, utterly reject this. They declare the entire scholarly establishment to be apostates, takfir al-ulama, effectively burning down the library of Islamic jurisprudence so that their own pamphlets become the only text. This is not rigor. It is intellectual anarchy. It allows them to create a DIY Islam where every young recruit with an internet connection feels empowered to issue fatwas of death, bypassing 14 centuries of learned debate, wisdom, and balance. By severing themselves from ijma, they place themselves outside the fold of Islamic orthodoxy. With the scholarly tradition discarded, they then employ a manipulative hermeneutic best described as textual literalism divorced from context. They wield verses of the Quran like blades, but they rip them from the historical, circumstantial, and textual context that gives them meaning. A primary example is their obsessive use of the so-called sword verse. Then, when the sacred months have passed, kill the polytheists wherever you find them, and capture them, and besiege them, and sit in wait for them at every place of ambush. Presented in isolation, it sounds like a command for perpetual, indiscriminate slaughter. But this verse, revealed during a specific existential war with the polytheists of Mecca, who had violated treaties and were actively mobilized to exterminate the Muslim community, is surgically removed from its historical moment. It is also stripped from the surrounding verses that speak of amnesty for those who seek peace, and it is blatantly contradicted by the dozens of other Quranic verses that command restraint, offer forgiveness, and uphold freedom of belief. This is intellectual dishonesty of the highest order. They ignore the foundational Quranic principle that verses must be interpreted in light of the whole, and that specific rulings are understood through the overarching objectives, maqasid, of the Sharia, the preservation of life, faith, intellect, lineage, and property, objectives their actions obliterate. Furthermore, they weaponize prophetic narrations, ahadith, with the same reckless abandon. They seize upon reports from specific battles and universalize them, while ignoring the prophetic sunnah in its totality. His mercy, his pardons, his treaties, and his strict wartime prohibitions. Even more insidiously, they resurrect extremist theological deviations that were marginalized and condemned by mainstream Sunni Islam centuries ago. The ideology of takfir, excommunicating other Muslims, is a direct descendant of the Kharijiti sect, which the Prophet warned against, calling them the dogs of hellfire. Their embrace of violent rebellion against established Muslim authorities mirrors the very deviation the companions united to fight. They are not revivalists. They are, in a dark sense, archaeologists of heresy, digging up the most toxic and rejected ideas in Islamic history and presenting them as rediscovered truth. The ultimate goal of this weaponization is not spiritual salvation. It is political power and psychological mobilization. Jihad is stripped of its spiritual depth, jihad al-nafs, and its ethical constraints, and is rebranded as a simplistic, glorified call to arms. It becomes a powerful recruitment and retention tool. It offers alienated young men a potent identity, not as a student, a son, or a contributor to society, but as a holy warrior in a cosmic binary battle. It simplifies a complex world into us versus them and grants a false sense of purpose and empowerment through destruction. The caliphate they claim to build is not a callback to the justice of Umar ibn al-Khattab. It is a totalitarian dystopian project built on fear, slavery, and genocide. They use the language of faith to fuel a death cult. Our responsibility as believers is threefold. First, we must know our tradition deeply enough to spot these distortions from a mile away. We must be familiar with the classical ethics of war we discussed previously. Second, we must name the deviation clearly and courageously. We cannot be squeamish. We must state unequivocally that these groups are Khawarij in ideology and method. The Prophet described them. They will recite the Quran, but it will not go beyond their throats. They will pass through the religion as an arrow passes through its target. They use the words of faith, but its meaning and mercy never reach their hearts. Third, we must offer a compelling, positive alternative. We must make the beauty of mainstream, balanced Islam, its spirituality, its community service, its intellectual richness, more attractive and accessible than the false, violent glamour they peddle. The battle against this weaponization is itself a form of jihad, a jihad of knowledge, of speech, and of truth-telling. By deconstructing their methodology, we disarm them. We expose that their foundation is not piety, but a brittle scaffolding of selective quotes, historical illiteracy, and profound spiritual emptiness. We affirm that true faith seeks to build, to heal, and to elevate humanity, not to burn it down. Defending Islam from these distortions is a sacred duty upon every one of us who bears witness that there is no God but Allah. Thank you for your commitment to growth. May Allah grant you beneficial knowledge, the strength to act upon it, and make you amongst those who hear the word and follow the best of it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.